All right, greetings to all, and it's a pleasure to be with you all. And we have today a very special guest. As a matter of fact, he is a scholar, and other than a scholar, he is an activist. And more than that, as a matter of fact, and this is why I highly respect him and I like him, I consider him a very dear friend, indeed, a very dear friend. Really, I kind of look up what he say, and I saying, listen, if Asaf said something, that's mean it's correct. Period. So let me go ahead and introduce what he has to speak about today and a little bit about himself. Really much to say about him, but I'm going to make it a little bit concise. We're going to be speaking about today about his recent book, mainly October 7, The Wars Over Words and Deeds. And he's going to be speaking about mainly how the words and imagery used to categorize the violence of October 7 assaults by Hamas have been used to reframe the historical narrative of the century-long conflict into an avalanche of anti-Semitism and cultural toxicity that has attempted to reshape American society, impacting politics, media, and academia. And by the way, today I read a couple of review, and they were excellent, excellent on his book. Now, let me introduce Dr. Asaf. Dr. Asaf Romirowsky, he is the Executive Director of Scholar for Peace in the Middle East and the Association for the Study of the Middle East and Africa. And I will speak about it a little bit. Dr. Romirowsky is also a senior non-resident research fellow at the Begin Sadat Center for Strategic Studies and a professor affiliate at the University of Haifa. Trained as a Middle Eastern historian, he holds a PhD in Middle East and Mediterranean Studies from King's College, London, UK, and has published widely on various aspects of the Arab-Israeli conflict and American foreign policy in the Middle East, as well as on Israeli and Zionist history. Romirowsky is co-author of Religion, Politics, and the Origin of Palestine Refugee Relief, and a contributor to the Case Against Academic Boycotts of Israel. His latest book is entitled, today we're going to speak about it, and of course we are going to open the floor. It's a very broad subject, topical subject, timely subject. October 7, The Wars Over Words and Deeds. Romirowsky publicly engaged scholarship has been featured in the Wall Street Journal, National Interest, American Interest, New Republic, Times of Israel, Jerusalem Post, Ynet, and Tablet, among other online and print media. I would like to say something. Mainly, he is, again, the executive director, of Scholar for Peace. But I would like to speak something about the Association for the Study of the Middle East and Africa. And why I mention that every year, they organize a great forum, seminars. And by the way, last year, I was there, and students, PhD students from this university attended this event. And more than that, they were able to give a talk there based on their writings. So let me speak a little bit about ASMIA, or the Association for the Study of Middle East and Africa. It's an academic society dedicated to promoting the highest standard of research and teaching in Middle Eastern and African studies. It is a response to the mounting interest in these increasingly interrelated fields and the absence of any single group addressing them in a comprehensive, multidisciplinary fashion. ASMIA is first and foremost a community of scholars concerned with protecting academic freedom and promoting the search for truth. The association advances the discourse in these fields by providing its members with new opportunities to publish and present ideas to the academic community and beyond. Their founding chairman, were none other than really Professor Bernard Lewis and Professor Fuad Ajami. And today it reached a new height under the executive leadership of Dr. Asaf Romirowsky. Asaf, it's a pleasure to be here with you. And as I mentioned, I highly admire you as a scholar, but all you as a friend. Now, let us start, as a matter of fact, the first 15, 20 minutes. Tell us about the main themes of your book.
Sure. So above all, Robert, the feeling is mutual. Our friendship and relationship goes a long way back, and it's great to be here with you, your colleagues and students, and amongst friends. And that's a good segue to why we wrote this book. So October 7th, this is the book itself. October 7th, The War Over Roads and Deeds, was a project that we started about a little bit a year after the war began, with the idea of trying to understand the dearth and really the failures that led to 10/7 and trying to understand how it all played out. There have been, as all of you understand and know, Israel has been fighting a war, a multi-front war against Iran, a war on 7 fronts. One of the spheres, I would argue, or the battlefront that was ignored by the Israelis, and this really relates to the intelligence failure, there's been an ongoing tracking of money and support that has been going from the Middle East outside of the Middle East, but the battlefield that was lost is really the one that we're fighting here in the United States and in Europe. The money that's being transported and really how everything was mobilized in the United States. There is a connectivity that led to 10/7, and part of that is a battle that you and I have spoken about over the years, is really how we lost the hearts and minds as it related to understanding and dissecting the Middle East. You and I know so well the Middle East is a culturally rich environment, politically, culturally, theologically, historically. However, the unfortunate reality, and this is why, obviously I'm a big fan and support of what you're doing at FAU, because that's not the norm. It's been boiled down into a binary, one-sided perspective where the Middle East has been dissected and understood as a black and white understanding. And what we tried to do here is really try to understand how the academy has been asphyxiated as far as the amount of knowledge that when you talk about this rich region, and how in that same process they've allowed Hamas to basically take over and hijack the academy. So let me step back historically a little bit to try to explain this narrative and try to understand how it went about. I would argue since the 1950s and the 1960s, there has been a slow but sure a hijacking of what we call agents of soft power, the academy and the media at large. This modality, by the way, stems back to the early founders of the PLO under Yasser Arafat and company, and they based that model based on the Soviet model. They tested out words, trigger words that would resonate with the West. Words like justice and human rights and indigeneity. And what they've done is basically to figure out what words would resonate with the West in order to try to create this binary perspective. And the Soviets actually worked that out. They tested it out as far as how that played out. The founders of the PLO, Arafat and company, were themselves student activist, and they started a lot of their activism on Arafat and company at the University of Cairo. And they were also very much inspired by these revolutionary movements that were happening in the 1960s on American college campuses, like the Black Panthers, like the Weather Underground, and they saw American college campuses as fertile ground to create and cascade that narrative. The PLO was understanding that maybe they won't be able to defeat Israel militarily speaking. However, they will be able, and they've invested a ton of effort and a ton of funds in winning the hearts and minds. And so that was part of this hijacking of the academy. And so to that end, what we also started to see is a process of purchasing departments and chairs with the idea that if one buys a department or a chair, one also buys the politics in which these topics are being taught. So, for example, the first place that was bought was the King Fahad Center at the University of Arkansas. Nobody cared about Arkansas, nobody knew about Arkansas, but it became a model that could be replicated. And slowly you started to see this growth of buying chairs and departments. In addition to that, we started to see a growth of Palestinian groups that were taking over, were starting to operate on different parts of American college campuses, San Francisco State, Berkeley, a group known as GUPS, the General Union for Palestine Students, with the idea of creating a succinct binary understanding of the Middle East, where the centrality of the Middle East resides only in the so-called struggle for Palestine and the PLO's narrative, and that was concretized by a lot of these departments and by creating and putting in the right people that would create this ecosystem that was a closed chamber of understanding of the reality that laid out. Of course, all of this was amplified, and this is something you and I, Robert, have discussed for years, was the impact of Edward Said, and of course, how this entire narrative, apropos Asmiya, was cascaded onto Mesa. Asmiya was created as a counter to Mesa, the Middle East Studies Association, and that too was purported to be a scholarly academic society, which I would argue no longer exists because back in 2017, they already voted on BDS. So to my mind, they are no longer have any even semblance of a scholarly organization. And they too only bought into a binary black and white perspective that was amplified by Edward Said. Everybody here should understand, of course, that Said was not a Middle East specialist. He was a propagandist, but he was able to create through his work and through his writings in the New York Times and New York Review of Books. He became one of the more prolific advocates for the Palestinian narrative, and this was, of course, seeped into the Middle East Studies Association and took that over. There was a famous debate, parenthetically, between him and Bernard Lewis, who was one of the founding fathers of Asmiya back in the 1980s. And one of the main, I think, failures of that debate that Lewis thought that he was actually coming to an academic debate. And of course, Said already won that debate in the pages of the New York Times before it even started, given how he projected it out. But that was the mistake because Lewis was about scholarship and Said was not. Again, part of the differences that played out here. But this is all part of this attempt, a successful attempt, I would argue, to win the hearts and minds of the academy. Now, all of this plays also into the hands of Hamas and the Islamist movement, because what you also interestingly, that plays into how this all was instituted. So Hamas sets up shop in Gaza in 87. By 1993, they're here in my backyard in Philadelphia with the idea again of, and we know this today as a result of FBI minutes that were discovered as far as the first meeting that took place here in Philadelphia, as far as hijacking mosques and creating and instituting, again, how do you win the hearts and minds of American society? How do you weave in Islamism into the narrative? And how do you raise a great deal of money? Because the message was very simple. If you can't support the cause on the ground, if you can't fight for the struggle for Palestine, you can write large checks. And so that's another part of the feature and dimensions that played into sanitizing Hamas on American society. And so from a policy standpoint, it's also worthy of note, again, also put it into the historical context. 1993 is the Oslo Peace Accords. In 1993, they're here in Philadelphia with the clear intention of disrupting any kind of normalization between Israel and its neighbors or Israel and Palestinians. Again, that goes counter to anything that relates to Israeli-Palestinian relations. I would also argue at large that one of the main demands of the boycott, divestment, and sanction movement is anti-normalization, and that all feeds into that larger narrative. And so 1993 is happening. Up until 9/11, it is worthy of note that American foreign policy was only focused on state-sponsored terrorism, and they did not pay enough attention to the charities, the non-state actors, the NGO sector at large. That only happened after 9/11. And then again, we learned, unfortunately, these lessons were lessons learned in blood. After the case of the Hoyland Foundation, we started to see, individuals who are involved with Hamas, Marzouk and others, were all here in the United States. And again, it's important to understand that all of the individuals that we're talking about today, they've been playing the long game. They've planned this. None of this, and this is part of the message of the book, that 10/7 did not come in a vacuum. We may have been surprised, but they've been planning this for decades. And there was a clear blueprint that was laid out at how to make this happen. So it was no surprise, apropos these trigger words that I was talking about, that one of the most common paradigms to describe, I think, in a false way, but very common in the academy is related to the Israeli-Palestinian dynamic, is, of course, that Israel is a white settler colonial power. And so how this was used to the advantage of the pro-Hamas narrative on American college campuses, that immediately on 10/8, on 10/9, this was depicted as decolonialism. Thereby, it was justified. We have documented faculties who basically said how exhilarated, how awesome it was, and how they basically went around. And this is something we didn't even see after 9/11, where you saw individuals parading around flags of ISIS and Hamas and supporting terrorism under the banner of the academy, and how that was sanitized within the academy at large. It's no surprise, and Robert, you know this from your day job, that Hamas members who were going on Al Jazeera were thanking American students for their support for the cause. How did that happen? This was all planned. On 10/8 and 10/9, you had toolkits that were delivered by one of the #1 groups that is a springboard for Palestinian activism, the Students for Justice in Palestine. SJP is a sponsored group by the American Muslims for Palestine. And American Muslims for Palestine, the preamble to that organization, or the successor group to that group, was a group known as the Islamic Association for Palestine. That was part of the groups that were connected to the Holy Land Foundation case back in early on. So that, again, there is a lineage here. There's a line that connects. None of these things happened by coincidence, and this was all part of the narrative that played out here. Part of the things that we dissect in the book here, which I think is also part of the significance of it, is the political economics of anti-Semitism. When we talk about the environment today, as I mentioned at the beginning of my remarks, this was a battlefield that was lost, unfortunately, on the Israelis. Again, winning the hearts and minds. And again, how was it so immediate that you had so much support for Hamas and Islamism on American college campuses? What you see today, and this is part of what we describe, is the coalition of the red, green, and brown alliance all coming together to support this larger cause. And so green representing Islamists, Hamas, brown representing Nazis, and of course red representing socialists. And so if you look at who's funding these organizations, the fascinating part as far as tracking the money of all of these are the one common denominator, even though they may seem ideologically different, is their animus and the anti-Semitism and anti-Americanism, anti-Westernism towards Israel. And of course, that the ideology is not only anti-Semitic and anti-Israel, but it's also anti-American, anti-Western. And that's all perpetuated through this narrative. And so you have individuals here that we talk about, like Roy Neville Singham, who is married to the founder, Jody Evans of Code Pink. Code Pink, of course, is also connected to this. Groups like Occupy Wall Street, Black Lives Matter, all these groups, the Democratic Socialists of America, the party that, of course, Mamdani comes out of that, the People's Forum. There is a group of all of these organizations, a coalition of groups that were able to fund and to create a succinct binary message on an American college campus. Not to mention people like George Soros, again, illustrated by the fact that the tents that were on campuses, they were all the same color. They were all made. I mean, this was all branded, and it was all, it was all coordinated. You had this, you had this orchestrated effort for one predetermined outcome in order to create an environment where, again, Jews and Israelis can do no right, and the Palestinians can do no wrong. This binary perspective was concretized by this reality. And if you trace all of this back, again, as I said in the beginning of my remarks, you had the historical narrative of 1967, which was, again, a major turning point in studying all of this. It was also a beginning where you started to see a growth. The largest population of recipients of Fulbright scholars in the 70s and 80s were Palestinians coming to the United States, using the American Academy with the sole intention of trying to turn American democratic institutions on their heads with the creation of this binary perspective. And that also was fed into the rise of the boycott, divestment, and sanction movement. Again, you saw that post-Durban in 2005, where you started to see individuals parading in the streets of Durban were Zionism is racism, genocide, apartheid, all these trigger words, and that were part of the zeitgeist of the conversation. And so immediately, again, Jews, Zionists are immediately colonialists and Nazis. There is a critical part of Holocaust inversion, and this all feeds into the Arab-Palestinian narrative and the Hamas narrative of how all this bookends. 1948 being understood as the Nakba, the catastrophe, or which is translated literally synonymously into Holocaust. Nakhtsa, being 1967, was the missed opportunity of not being able to achieve the destruction of the state of Israel. And so the use of Holocaust imagery and the use of Nazi imagery in order to depict Jews was all by design. So there is no greater racist group than, of course, Zionists. And that's also part of how, when you look at the conversation on the campuses, where Jews, of course, are depicted as Nazis. And this is all part of that illustration. But part of, the other part of the book itself was also dissecting, we divided it up into several parts. The origins of Hamas's ideology, understanding what Hamas really stands for and the objective of Hamas, the politics of how it played into the academy and played into all these groups that I've been describing now, not only the political, the financial backing, but also the hijacking of student senate, faculty senate, the rise of BDS. There's a great deal of information on that. How it all plays into, of course, the element of, I think, a growing problem that I think has become visibly clear, crystal clear these days, post 10/7, is that you also have a very healthy fifth column within the Jewish community, the I'm Jewish but narrative, or that are really Jewish anti-Semites who are also playing into this conversation as well and serve as a fig leaf for many of these organizations, these progressive groups who are trying to basically say, that we are, that we're not anti-Semitic, we're just anti-Zionist, in order to try to articulate the fact that I'm not a racist, I'm just a critique, I'm just a critic of the state of Israel. But the fact of the matter is that if anybody had any doubt, 10/7, to my mind, validates how the anti-Zionism they claim to be and anti-Semitism are indeed synonymous. I've always argued that, but I think it became even clearer today as far as their demands and as far as their objectives at large. And so it is fascinating. Again, this is a turning point in the Middle East. To my mind, 10/7 is really Israel's second war of independence. But how did all of this come about? With the failed intelligence that led to all of this to come about. But the critical part, which is really, I think, is where the hearts and minds were won, is how the fact that terrorism was able to be embraced as a legitimate cause and gets a pass on American college campuses, and Israel as a vibrant state is still depicted as the aggressor in all of this. Illustrated today, 2.5 years since the war began, is the mounting levels of denialism, despite the amount of evidence of the rape, the maiming, the brutality, the barbarism. Still, there is a constant denial of these efforts, and in particular, within the space that you and I are in, Robert, within the area of Middle East studies. I mean, again, there's a myopic view of the arena without looking at what's happening around the region at large and the centrality of the Israeli-Palestinian dynamic as the number one singular issue at large, without looking at what's happening in the region all along. And this is also fascinating to observe as the internal support. And by the way, this was, as you and I know so well, the sole goal of Yasser Arafat, to make the Palestinian cause celeb, of the entire Arab world, that nobody should rest until this cause is solved, even though there is no self-reflection or or introspective look as far as who's to blame for maintaining the Palestinian in their stasis. Again, this is all part of the argument. So to that end, what you have here is a continuation of this, where I would argue that propaganda has replaced scholarship in our very institutions that allow this to thrive. So really, what we all tried to do here, with many of my colleagues and contributors here in this volume, was to unpack all of this, to kind of show that if we care about trying to understand what's happening in the Middle East, let's not go in with our blinders on, but let's look at, and then we also have to be, critical and see what the institutions that we care so much about are actually doing to actually give the tools and the skill set to actually look at the scholarship, look at the languages, look at the culture, and try to understand what's happening in the region and not go in with our blinders on. I mean, this is part, I think, is where there's been a myopic viewpoint of the Middle East at large, and October 7th really validates that. But we have seen a conscious effort, and that has been played out not only by the individuals on campus, but also the funders outside who've created a distinct narrative in order to create a predetermined outcome. And so again, boiling the Middle East and boiling the entire conflict into a black and white issue, I find that to be ahistorical, antithetical to the university, what the university should be looking at. And so we did try to unpack all of these issues at large here and kind of say where we're going forward. I mean, I think that this is really a major turning point. And you're seeing a lot of the issues that we identified here play out in the unfortunate political reality that we're in. I mean, words have meanings, words have consequences. When we talk about the fact that globalizing intifada, those are not just empty words.
All right.
They have actual consequences. A lot of blood has been shed by the use of these words. And so we need to understand the nefarious element of how these elements played out here. But when you go back to what, what we did here with exposing the money and tracking the money here, what we need to understand is that these are foreign terrorist organizations that have been able to insert themselves into the American academe and to basically use that in order to sell their message. Groups like AMP and SJP and CARE and others are Muslim Brotherhood organizations, and they are getting a pass within the academy. Money is coming in, money is being laundered by the universities without actually looking to see where the monies are coming from.
Open.
And I think there should be a wake-up call to actually see where the money is coming from and what we can do about it in order to reform and to ensure the fact that students, faculty have a place where there can actually be a legitimate discourse of ideas, actual research. That's part of the work that we're trying to do at ASMEA, as far as producing scholarship and opening up a broader range and a broader scope of looking at the Middle East at large, and trying to understand, yes, the role of the Israeli-Palestinian dynamic, but also look at everything else that's going around the region. We've seen over the past few years changes in the region, not to mention the Abraham Accord, which is a major event as far as normalizing in the region at large. However, unfortunately, while the Abraham Accords were a monumental event as far as normalization between Israel and the Gulf states, it made little to no difference on the discourse on American college campuses, or in European for that matter, because the religiosity of the day is solely focused on the Israeli-Palestinian dynamic. And so we need to also contextualize all of that, and try to understand the forces behind all of this, and the fact that this is something that, for the sake and the health and the well-being of the academy, it would serve us well to actually be honest about what's happening in the region, who our allies are, but the forces that have basically been trying to take over and hijack the academy. And this is also a feature of a dimension of trying to impact American society, because if you only get a one-sided viewpoint, then you're going to be voting based on that level. And this, whatever happens in a lot of these areas, is not limited to the academy. The political toxicity plays into all of this, and we're seeing it all over now as far as how these groups play into different spheres in American culture.
Very good. Thank you so much, really, Asaf. It's a wonderful and insightful and comprehensive outlooks that you provided. I want to mention that to you. Currently now, I am sorry, I have to sneeze. Sorry. Okay.
Go ahead.
Currently now, I am giving lecture series on I don't know. I am terribly sorry. I told you, my wife allowed the cat to sleep on my sweater, and I didn't know about it, and I just wore the sweater. But anyway, uh, I am giving a lecture series now on Islam and Islamism and anti-Semitism in Europe. Really, and as I was preparing, this lecture series from the summer, Asaf, I started to see, I went, yes, what you said, absolutely right. But also, I have taken, I taken note of some things that happen, you know, with the European, the self-guilt, Franz Fanon, the wretched of the earth, Paul Jean Sartre, how really blamed United States and really he wanted to go ahead and criminalize United States in Vietnam. And really, I looked at academia and I saw that mainly European academia, true, you had, the Palestinian questions there, but the Palestinian question was not big there. What was big there? Colonialism, self-guilt. And what happened is that they started looking, as a matter of fact, what we have done is wrong. And this, what happened is that then came Edward Said, and Edward Said really somehow he wedded, the Palestinian question with European self-guilt and European past, mainly, and history. And I think myself, really, when I look now, and as I look at Europe, I feel that, something really that happened now, I know it can be distangled, but it's gonna take so much time. So really, and when I look at questions, and today, as a matter of fact, in offering this lecture series, there is so much involved. As a matter of fact, you are absolutely right to speak about the academia and absolutely right to speak about the Marxist and what I call myself the new left and the influence of the Islamist. And really, it's an uphill battle, Asaf. It's an uphill battle. And I don't know, I want to ask this question. Do you think this generation of students that have been, as a matter of fact, indoctrinated by such professors will see the light at the end of the tunnel soon, or it's going to take for the next generation? And I know it's a very, very broad question, but based on what you do, based on the experience, based on the effort you are doing, and I am part of that effort also in a very humble capacity. Do you think that, this outlook, these visions that have created for Israel, and not only for Israel, for United States as an imperialist country. Let's not forget that. So they have wedded, as a matter of fact, United States, supporting this colonial entity in the Middle East. So really what you have now, you have some, as a matter of fact, even Jewish, oh, we gotta decouple from Zionism. We are, against imperialism. So, and I wonder myself, and I am a professor like you, but also I am here on campus, I am on other campuses, and I see this avalanche, and I say, my God, and I look at myself and at my colleague and at you, and I say, listen, we need more allies, we need more, the word to be out. So tell me, do you think that this generation, why I'm talking about this generation? Because this generation is going to be in power. Many of it is going to be in many, a really important position in academia, in business, in society, in United Nations. And I feel, something just, this, like you said, not only I would have the binary look, black and white, merely somehow really, I would say hatred, and more than that, I would say that, listen, what we did is wrong, shame on us, we have to feel the self-guilt. So again, it's like, what are you talking about? What are you talking about?
Yeah,
Please,
no, I,
please.
I'm with you. I mean, look, I think that not to get too political, but I think that the election of Zoran Mamdani as a poster child, where he basically been able to make urban socialism trendy again. And so, and when you talk about the generation of students who are on campus today, this is a generation that was born post 9/11. I mean, they weren't around when 9/11 happened. So historical anchors don't matter. I mean, part of the degradation which we're seeing at large is that facts don't matter. It's all about feelings. I mean, this is also part of part of what we observed in the book itself. When all of the hearings were happening on Capitol Hill and all of these presidents were going on in question, not one of them said, go back and learn, go back and see something. I mean,
Yeah.
go actually study the facts. I mean, it's become a feature of feelings. I want to make sure that you feel good, cajole. If you as a professor, if me as a professor, make a student feel uncomfortable and makes them go back and research and do something, that's a good thing. I'm not here to validate your opinions.
Yeah.
And so we're living in an environment which I think is problematic in an environment of infotainment where people are, trying to glean information about larger topics
Yeah.
by a meme or a TikTok or, not to mention the dimension of AI today where there's a growing, plagiarism that plays into all of this as far as what facts actually are, but historical anchors don't exist. And I think that that's part of the problem. But to your earlier point, I mean, they've so much adopted Frantz Fanon and they're going into Wretched of the Earth, but they're not reading everything else that Fanon wrote. They're only reading some parts of it. There's no context. And I think that that's also part of the element that plays out. And you have this self-inflicted guilt of that we need to be every day wake up and do a mea culpa because we're evil Americans. But but if you think about it, how many of these young kids, naive kids, let's put it naive, we'll use naivete, have lived abroad to appreciate what America has to offer and to appreciate the lifestyle that, and American democracy. But it's very great, to advocate for these issues that no, don't exist in areas like Gaza. I mean, one of the greatest ironies or the hypocrisy that plays out. You had LGBTQ or queers and gays for Palestine. I mean, if you're openly gay in the areas of Gaza, you would not be walking alive. I mean, and the disconnect again. If all these groups so much cares about human rights violations, how many of them are out there protesting for the Iranian people?
Correct.
Crickets. Nobody's saying a word about that, about, how authoritarian, totalitarian regime who's been abusing its people for over 4 decades. Not a word.
Exactly.
And so there has been a weaponization of DEI, and which has also contributed to all this factor and this guilt factor here that we have to be guilty somehow. And one of the things that is missing, to my mind, and something I know you and I agree on, that is missing in academe today, is it used to be when you and I were students, people used to study civics, Common Core, Western civilization.
Yeah.
I mean, these are not common topics that are being taught today. And so they're latching on to, very, myopic topics that make sense in a very small way without understanding the consequences of it. And I think that your concern that you expressed in your earlier part is very much warranted, because I think that this bias and this hijacking doesn't start in higher education. Islamist groups in America have been going into K through 12. And so they're already being sanitized. So by the time they get to become freshmen in college, they've already bought into this fallacious narrative. And so we got to stop. We got to dig deeper, and we got to make sure that the American Academy is about the American Academy and the fact that we are actually producing the kind of value system that is aligned with American society and
Absolutely.
the values, how many people are reading On Liberty these days? I mean, I know how many reading Tocqueville, how many reading, any of the books, that really talk about democracy and Western civilization. So there is a gap there. And it may take, if we don't do something now, to your earlier point, a generation. I mean, we need to start yesterday. And there is still, thanks to you, you represent the balance that's happening in the academy. But we need to make sure that there is more people and there are more outlets and there are more people to go to so they can maintain that healthy balance in order to ensure the health of the academy.
Asaf, on the note that you said, the balance, I can tell you this. I teach, of course, the Middle East. I teach it as a seminar, graduate seminar, and undergraduate. And I can tell you this. When I tell my students, listen, if you want to learn, you want to this, I want to give you mainly the primary sources. Focus on the primary sources. And
Yeah.
from the primary sources, then if you want to see the narrative, the Palestinian narrative, American narrative, Israeli narrative. And I tell them, listen, some of the biggest supporter of Palestinian self-determination are Jewish authors, really.
Yeah.
So really, but focus first and foremost on primary sources. And from primary sources, you build your opinion. Don't go and, as a matter of fact, and forge your opinion based on what the teacher. And I tell them the first thing I go, listen to me. I am your professor, but I don't monopolize the truth. Period. If you want to study, if you want to forge your opinion, listen to more than one person, read about it, and focus on primary sources. And when you read the primary sources, as a matter of fact, and this is something I feel, and I hope that, you will have way more like this. At the end of the course, I feel that, of course, I'm not going to be able to change the opinions, but I know that you have a good number of students that would say, something, let's start taking a different look. And also, I would like to add, Asaf, to you, which is excellent presentation. When you look at Hamas and this, why Hamas ideology, Iran's ideology, why Hezbollah's ideology is not being taught, is not being exposed, as a matter of fact. And really, as a matter of fact, myself, that I've been now on many TV stations, including in Israel and other places, say I don't like to speak about it. So listen, if you want to define someone, speak about someone. Don't you want to start knowing where he stands, what's his ideology, how he defines himself, what's his vision, what's his outlook? Hamas's outlook early on cannot be reconciled with the Jewish state. Hezbollah, as a matter of fact, really, if you read the open letter 1985, it's about what? It's about obliterating state of Israel. Mainly Iran, it's the same thing. So really,
Yeah.
absolutely, and this is why I wondered why it's not out there. See them, read them. So don't listen to me. Don't think I am pro, I am against. I am not pro, I am against. I am pro what I see and based on research. And this is again the sad part, as a matter of fact. And I see that sad part. And this is what I'm gonna ask you now, my next question, and then I'm gonna open the floor for a question. The media. The media, as a matter of fact, really, now I am being called, and you see me many, and all what I do is I debate. But the point is, the media in Europe and United States, why don't they will be just open their eyes a little bit? Who is behind the media? Do you think that Hamas is behind the media? For me, it's difficult for me to feel that Hamas, even Qatar, has controlled so much outlet here in United States and especially in Europe. So what's going on with the media, Dr. Asaf? What's going on?
So first of all, I 100% agree with you. I mean, first of all, you and I were trained to look at primary sources. You look at the primary sources, you read the Arabic, the English, the Hebrew, or the Farsi, you look at the documentation, and you're able to teach based on that. That's old school. That's how things should be done. But that's not what's happening. That's not common practice. And to your point, which is critical, the the Islamist groups, Hamas, Hezbollah, ISIS, they never lied about their agenda. What happened
Exactly.
was lost in translation. We're saying, the Western media is saying, no, 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 that nobody can do it that way. How can we buy? Because that doesn't go hand in hand with Western ideology. You have a culture of death, a culture of denialism. And so even when the bin Laden documents were going out, people were saying, no, it doesn't make sense. Bin Laden's not going to do it. It's a lot of hogwash. That's not true. They're actually telling you how they're going to do it, when they're going to do it. And we're the ones, soft pedaling it and not believing them. And so the media has played a significant feature in amplifying these falsehoods. I mean, we saw it now during the war. I mean, the Ministry of Health of Gaza, that's Hamas. And so, immediately the New York Times was able to immediately accept that as fact. The number of deaths, the accusations of famine and genocide and whatnot, and all these numbers are being amplified. It doesn't matter that then again, you remember at the beginning of the war, there was an attack on the hospital, and
Yeah.
within 5 seconds or 20 seconds, I'm exaggerating here, in the New York Times said 500 people died. I mean, it wasn't verified. It didn't make sense, and they immediately blamed Israel. It didn't matter that the retraction was, on page, that was A1. On A10, 2 days later. But by then it's too late.
Too
And
late.
so,
Yes, yes.
and so we live on this immediacy where we have to
And
respond.
BBC recently, Asaf.
Right, the
BBC.
BBC. Right. But, this is the part where Hamas knew the game. Today, we have intelligence of the entire social media apparatus of Hamas of winning the hearts and minds, where they were able to hijack Twitter accounts, TikTok accounts. Remember, early on, they were using every social media outlet in order to create a narrative. They have won, and they've been able to hijack all these outlets where they are the eternal victims. And so that victimology allowed them to get a pass, no matter how brutal they've been. And so the media has had a significant role in all of this. And then when you take so-called experts,
Yeah.
get who get whatever real estate in pages of the New York Times to ratify that. I mean, it's insane. I mean, we have today, when the New York Times, and again, talk about, the New York Times published and the Guardian the blueprint of Yahya Sinwar, who was telling them how I was going to do it, what he was going to do. We have all the evidence now that's out there. And we're still not believing it. I mean, I know we believe it, but nobody, everybody's denying it as if, and trying to give them a pass. So this is exactly what I was saying to my earlier point. The fact that they were using agents of soft power, media and academia, in order to win the hearts and minds, those are the two messages of success, because that's how you win. People, you create sympathy, and people read it and they believe it to be truth. And truth is, far from being, found these days. I mean, look, you and I, know this so well. The whole concept of the university was supposed to be based on veritas, searching for truth. We're not doing that anymore. Now we're concerned about feelings, and facts and truth don't matter.
And making friends on social media.
Of course, that's another thing, right? Exactly.
Asaf, thank you. Listen, now I'm going to open the floor for question for Dr. Asaf. Please go ahead. Now, to make it better, I think, how about if you write it in the chat and I will read the chat and then Dr. Asaf will answer it. So I'm going to wait for you. Let me see here. Yeah, let me just 1 second. I don't know what you have here. I'm currently at work. I'm so happy I attended and made this time. Okay, well, I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait for someone to ask a question. Now, while I am waiting, probably I should ask a question. I want to tell you one thing. I really don't like going Al Jazeera, but I was told, Robert, please go ahead, go, since you are, and I want to mention that to you. And of course, and it's on recorded now, really, and we were talking about, what happened, this and that, Iran, Israel, and Gaza. And I mentioned that what Hamas did was a barbaric attack on Israel, and is indeed, that was a terror attack. And I can tell you this, the anchor jumped from his seat. He told me, how dare you say that? How could you say that? That's resistance. That's resistance. And then I went and I put it as a segment, small segment, and they send it, through a Facebook and Twitter and God knows what. And I looked at the mainly comments. You have no idea the comments were about me. I am the bad guy.
Of course.
I am the bad guy because I said mainly Hamas carried out a barbaric attack. And I just said, my God, seeing, is believing. Really, how could that happen? You want to ask a question? All right, let me ask another question. Probably my students or the people there are a little bit, worried or something. Don't worry, guys. Please don't worry. It's an open discussion. We are really, we are right there. I want to ask also another questions. I mean, mainly, of course, it's been talked about a lot, Qatar. And I know, you know about it, and I know really, and the question really about Qatar, which some would say, I'm going to give you, those who say, what are you talking about is too much, and those who are saying, no, it is at the heart of it. Some would say Qatar indeed is giving a lot of money, and I think it is giving a lot of money. But also I will say, listen, you have other university, they are not funded by Qatar, and they are worse than the university funded by Qatar. You know what I mean? So just my question is, how deep is Qatar involvement in United States, and especially in the academia of United States?
It's very deep. I mean, they're not the first ones. I mean, the Qataris from 2014 to 2020 have invested billions of dollars, not only in higher education, but also K through 12. But let's contextualize. Let's use an example. Qatar recently gave the mother of the Amir, Moza, a honorary doctorate at the University of Georgetown. Of course, they give money to Georgetown. Georgetown gives the mother of the Amir an honorary doctorate. She sits on the Qatari Foundation that dishes out money to everywhere else. And if you saw during the hearings on Capitol Hill, the Qatari lobbyist was sitting behind the president, to show the impact of how that plays out there. They know exactly what they're buying. And Qatar has been able to play, I would say, is the firefighter and the arsonist. They were trying to be involved in the hostage negotiation on the other hand, but they were also allowing the leaders of Hamas to live their lavish lifestyles in Doha and providing a safe haven. And so they are a state sponsor of terrorism. And so, but they have been able to leverage all of that, and not to mention the fact that we have one of the largest air bases, Al Wadid, in in the area, and they want, they're looking for American interests, they're looking for investment and whatnot. So they have been playing it both ways, but they know exactly what they're buying and what they're purchasing. Same Moza, who made an entire eulogize Yahya Sinwar on her social media feed about how sad she was and how much of a hero he was, and giving praises and adulation for Yahya Sinwar. I mean, so exactly where they stand. Yet she's also a fashion icon. She's also part of UNESCO. And so she's able to weave around the ideology and to insert the pro-Hamas narrative in the way that she plays it in these circles. And again, it's anti-American, it's anti-Western, but they're buying labels. Similarly, Northwestern in Chicago has a campus in Qatar, and they too. The last president, he was ousted, but he was the one it was one of the few presidents who was foolish enough to sign an agreement with the SJP on campus and admit to their demands. And so that was another part of the problem. And so you are seeing that this is a drop in the bucket for money for them, but they're buying influence. They're buying the hearts and minds. And the bigger question, and this is, again, a concern that I think we should all have. If you look at the student bodies, the undergrad student bodies of some of these places, so Columbia today, over 50% of its undergrad student body is foreign. Harvard, the same. And so they're all paying full rides. And so the question is, influence. Students coming in with different ideologies. If you're applying for programs, it doesn't say on the application process, are you or were you ever a member of a foreign terrorist organization? And I would say it's not only for students, also for faculty. You also have what are the backgrounds? Are we doing any background checks? I mean, we talk about, what is accepted, what's not accepted. And by the way, this is not only limited to Middle Eastern money. You're also seeing Russian money, CCP money. They're all buying influence on American institutions with the sole idea of trying to turn American democracy on its head using the American democratic institutions that we embrace so much.
As a matter of fact, I have my colleague, Dr. Renat, he asks this question. And let me read it for you, Asaf. Thank you for the informative presentation. You mentioned that the Soviets were at the forefront of the Hamas message tactics, from whom they learned. Do Russia and China still play an important role in this?
Yeah, 100%. It's a good question. I mean, and they learned from the Soviets. The PLO learned from the Soviets. I mean, there's no coincidences to my mind. The current Rais, the current chairman of the Palestine Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, is a byproduct of the University of Moscow, wrote his entire PhD on the fact that Zionism is Nazism, still a downloadable PDF on the PLO's website
Yeah.
in Arabic and in English. And so these words were tested and they were amplified by Islamist groups like Hamas and others. And they used them in order to create a trigger. All of us know who live in the academy, that part of the other attempt to try to understand is this kind of modality of intersectionality. In the kind of modality of intersectionality, the most oppressed group or the gold standard of oppression are the Palestinian narrative. So whatever group you support, you must support the Palestinian cause. And so that's all connected in these words and this verbiage that is connected to human rights, to struggle, to resistance. These are all the words that were tested out and were resonated. And so, again, to your earlier remarks, Robert, the guilt comes from the fact that we as Americans are taught to be globalists and we have to help, the downtrodden. We have to go out and help the world. And so when the cause has been positioned as an underdog cause, and they are, and we have to go support them because they have no running water and they're fleeing for their lives, and whatever imagery is out there, fallacious as it may be, that's where the support comes from, and the sympathy goes to that. And so that's, again, Israel is seen as the aggressor, and this is all part of that, narrative. But these words, and by the way, on the Chinese CCP aspect, to Rinat, to the question that was asked here, was of course the Confucius schools also use similar kind of tactics. This is not a new thing, again, trying to figure out terminology and verbiage that would resonate within our Western society. And liberalism and things like that. And so this again is no coincidence, but there are a lot of forces here. There's a lot of money here that has been invested in this industry, and higher education, unfortunately, operates like the industrial academic complex. They operate like hedge funds, and unless they are taught to say, where is the money coming from, or people asking, is the money tainted? Or, and then nobody is questioning that. And I think that those are questions that need to be asked.
Okay, I have one more question and then we'll end this wonderful session. You know that the UAE, now it's no longer sending its students to Great Britain. All right?
Right.
They said, listen, if I'm going to send you there, you are going to be brainwashed. Can you tell me a little bit more about the UAE, as an Arab country, in the heart of the Arab world, really, and its relationship with Israel, and if there are now today certain, joint projects, certain academic joint project. Do you know of such a thing, Asaf?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a lot of Israelis going to Dubai. There's a lot of Israelis who are, business work that's being done there. There's a colleague of ours who actually is in Dubai and translating Israeli textbooks in Dubai to teach about Israeli literature for in the UAE, which I think is all very positive. Part of what we've been trying to also do it as Mia as well is talk to colleagues, peer-to-peer reviews, write, present. There's an opportunity. I think that where we could expand the narrative. And 2 years ago we had the ambassador from Bahrain, to come and speak. And so, again, I think that there's, the war has obviously shifted and changed, and, there's a lot of hesitation in some places, but I think that there is a different modality. When the Abraham Accords were signed, part of what came out of the messaging to the Palestinians from the UAE and from countries like Bahrain was like, well, it's not that we are less pro-Palestinian or care about your cause, but maybe your modality for how you do business should be different, because the modality for peace with the normalization with Israel was based on economic benefits. At the time, it was also, when it was first signed, it was also based on medical reviews, so helping out with COVID vaccinations and things like that. So there are opportunities that can shift. If you look at the Middle East today, which you and I study on a day-to-day basis, I mean, it's a very different Middle East than it was even 30 years ago when you
Yeah.
only had Jordan and Egypt. Now you have a very different Middle East where they started to see Israel not as a liability, but as an added value.
Yeah.
And zooming out a bit, understanding that the greater threat, the greater destabilizing force is the Islamic Republic of Iran, not Israel. I mean, we saw it also with the military operations when, the attacks from Iran came in during the height of the war, where you had coalitions coming together, Jordanians, Saudis, all working together because they understood the larger threat. So I think there's an opportunity here for change, and we need to build on that.
Yes. I really think so, especially with the UAE and other Arab Gulf country, really.
Yeah, 100%.
You know?
And that all starts, by the way, Robert, with what you and I are doing, education. We need to get more education, more conversation, and not rely on the propaganda. We need to actually have conversations and actually do things that, are able to connect peer to peer and actually understand what's happening and not, and this is the gap that exists between the perceived reality in Europe and the United States on some campuses versus the actual reality on the ground. And we have to bridge that gap and do a better job with that.
Asaf, Dr. Asaf, really, I cannot thank you enough. It was a very insightful, very informative, a wonderful and comprehensive presentation. I thank you, and I thank you on behalf of the faculty here. I thank you on behalf of my students, and it's going to be out there, recorded and posted. Dr. Asaf, I look forward to seeing you in person. Stay well and stay warm since you are in Philadelphia. Okay?
Thank you as always, Robert. Thank you for the hospitality and look forward
Oh,
to
it's my pleasure. It's my pleasure all the time, my friend. Thank you. Thank you, Asaf. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.